When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Hi, welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana. Election Day is 2 weeks away on November 7th, and I know the last few weeks have also been all campaign all the time, and this week is really no different. Tonight my guests are Seanice Austin, who is the Green Party candidate, and Aaron Ide, who is one of the Republican candidates for New London City Council this year. And I first of all invited both of them because I thought the discussions would be really good. But I also invited them because of all the candidates for City Council this year, they are the two who I noticed show up at every event. So I knew they'd say yes. So welcome both of you.
Thank you.
I guess we should start out. I know the two of you are probably familiar to a lot of the viewers, but maybe not all. Would each of you like to talk a little bit about your background and your passions and what you could bring to a city council? And I don't really care which order you go to.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you for having me tonight, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with Aaron. So again, my name is Seanice Austin. I am a long-time New London resident. My family has been here probably about 3 generations, and grew up here, graduated from New London High School. My children went to public school here. One of the interesting things that I'll share about me, I always like to share something different, is I probably have lived in every district in New London. So when my family first came, I was about 14 years old, and we lived in East New London in the Crystal Avenue high-rises. I've lived on Buchanan Road and everywhere in between, Jefferson Avenue, and now I reside on Ocean Avenue down by the beach. So I'm all New London, and represent everyone that's from this city. My background is in higher education. I worked for 28 years in higher ed at both Connecticut College and the University of Connecticut. And now I am a small business owner. I work in financial services. I have my own financial services company where I help people get in a better financial position. So again, I'm excited to be here and excited to be running for City Council.
Aaron.
So I am not a born and bred New Londoner. I've been here now for 13 years. I came here when I got a job offer from EB. I was looking for a place to call home. I don't have any hometowns per se. My dad was in the Air Force. I was born in Los Angeles. I went to high school in New Jersey. I went to school in upstate New York. I lived in Connecticut, in East Hartford and New Haven before here, and now I'm in. And I got a job in Groton, and I was like, okay, where should I live? And I wanted to find a place. And New London has this feeling and this culture that was unique, right? And it's an actual city, and it has this actual history. And so much of the country is just suburban sprawl. It felt like there's a charm and a hominess to it. And I've set down my roots here for the last 13 years. So bought a house right away. I've been at EB now the last 13 years. I am an engineering project lead on the Virginia program, so the fast attack class submarines. Started as an engineer, worked on the waterfront for a bit, and now I'm on the program management side doing kind of construction readiness and some special project boat stuff. So overall, trying to get more involved in the city. I actually started right away. I did a program called First Robotics when I was in high school in New Jersey, and it was a great program. It taught me how to use machine tools and code and do CAD and be a better engineer and be a better critical thinking. It was a great program, and we had a team here in New London that was floundering. I think they had 6 students and 1 teacher. So I volunteered on that when I first moved here, actually a year after I first moved here, and was a mentor there for the last 12 years now. I was the lead mentor for 4 years. So we had a great run in 2017, going all over the World Championships. But yeah, it's a great program. So I've been trying to give back to the community that way. That's actually what got me into politics when I started getting into trying to get money from the school board or trying to see how things work and fight for money and resources for that program. So that got me involved here. Outside of EB, like I said, I've gone to the dark side on the program management side. I used to be an engineer, so I was an aeronautical engineer by training, and they don't build many airplanes at EB, so I decided to start my own small business, building a half-scale World War II warbird replicas that people can build themselves. So trying to set my own small business there. So.
Well, now listening to both of you, I'm actually particularly happy that the two of you are on. I'm from Philadelphia originally, and I think you talked about suburban sprawl all over the country, but really Connecticut has a tremendous amount of suburban sprawl, and I think that 3 of us all kind of are attracted to New London because of its more city aspects rather than some people who kind of seem envious of the suburbs and want to make us more like them. So just a small observation. I guess I'll ask each of you, and you can start this time, Aaron, what are the 1 or 2 big issues that you feel really made you want to run for this office?
I think just in general, I feel like the city has been, it became clear to me it's a one-party system. There is very little opportunity for those that aren't politically connected. Regardless of party, there is the people that are well connected and then the rest of us. And I learned that, like I said, working with the robotics team and trying to figure out how to get things. When you say, oh, this person here is getting my budget, right? We got a budget put in for the robotics team and someone else was collecting it. And I was like, I'm convincing all these other engineers to come as volunteers, and we're putting thousands of dollars of our own money into the team, and find out someone else is collecting the money that the Board of Ed was allocating it. Kind of got my goat on that one. And the other one's just poorly managed infrastructure. Like it sounds stupid, like broken windows and bad sidewalks, but I live right next to the hospital, and we've torn up Montauk 3 times in the last 10 years, 5 years, something like that. And there's no planning in the city for it when it comes to our infrastructure. We don't have any system of developing or managing, right? As an engineering project manager, my day job is literally to make sure that we can make plans that are executable. And in this city, we do a lot of things that sound good. They're great for a sound bite. You push them through and you say, oh, this is a good idea, or it's going to get me a vote this year. They sign it and then they let it go forever. And we don't think about the repercussions, right? We have the new building down on Bank Street. We just repaved Bank Street, and then 2 days later, now there are 3 months later, they're tearing it up to put a main in. They go, oh, don't worry, we're not paying for it. Someone else is paying for it. Well, that's not the problem. It wasn't planned out well, right? I want to push for a 50-year infrastructure plan. It doesn't have to be the same plan for 50 years. Every council should be able to get a chance to revise it, but actually plan your work, right? Failure to plan is planning to fail. So make sure that we have a city that actually plans out their infrastructure problems, so we're not tearing up streets 3 times in a year.
And as you were speaking, I was remembering that about maybe 15 years ago, Ledge Light Health District, when Cindy Barry was there, did a survey of what keeps people from going out of doors and getting exercise in New London. And one of the biggest obstacles that people complained about was bad sidewalks and bad lighting. So sometimes it seems like we do these things that are kind of splashy, but what affects people every day is the basic infrastructure stuff that isn't at all glamorous. Okay, so Seanice, what issue or issues brought you to running for city council?
Sure. So just to kind of add on to what Aaron just shared in terms of having a plan, what really encouraged me to want to run for office this year is not only to have a plan, but have a strategic plan that is forward-facing, where residents know, we know what the plan is. Like, right now, I just feel like the city, if there is a vision, right, it's internal. It's kept in the workings of the inside group, and it's not something that I, as a resident, know about. So I would love to see a forward-facing strategic plan. What our city is going to look like in the next 20, 30 years. Part of the reason why I'm interested in running for office is we're at a critical time, I believe, in our city. And we are at a rebirth of urban renewal, urban development. And I believe that when we were at this juncture 60, 70 years ago, there was no vision, there was no forward thinking. It was all about the moment. And I want to be a part of how the city plans our next phase, our next development. I've also had an awakening, an awareness period over the last several years where we need to be actively engaged in our government. And I was no longer going to passively sit by and have internal conversations, but not be an active part of trying to change the direction and the trajectory of where our government is going.
So, we have a little bulletin board at our campaign headquarters on Masonic Street, and we ask people who come to fill out little Post-it notes what the issues that concern them are and what the city should prioritize. And one thing that is on about a third of the little Post-it notes is housing. Not all the same issue with housing, but having a roof over your head is really fundamental, and a lot of people think that there are some issues with housing. So I don't know, you two can have a conversation even without me about what are we doing with housing, what should we be doing with housing, what gaps are we seeing?
Well, I'll start by saying people are not wrong. They're not wrong in feeling as though we're in a crisis in terms of housing. And it isn't just New London, it's a national crisis. Inventory is low, housing prices have skyrocketed, and the infrastructure, you mentioned that earlier, has been allowed to deteriorate to a point where now we are not being proactive, we're being reactionary. And that's what we're seeing with our housing right here in New London. So, we just came from a housing authority meeting earlier today, and New London is looking at restructuring, tearing down some of its public housing, low income, senior citizen, disability focused housing. And now is the time to have conversations about how we can reimagine what that looks like. Did you want to add anything before?
So I think there's kind of three tiers, right? Or four tiers. Let's ignore the fourth one. That's just the wealthy, right? All the people that can afford the really nice houses along the coastline. The very lowest rung is your state-owned subsidized housing. That's where these came from, and that's limited spaces, right? No matter how many units you have, you're never gonna have enough units because New London is supporting basically the entirety of the southeastern Connecticut region. We have most of the majority of the subsidized housing for the
Correct.
region. So we'll never build enough of those housing. So you have to have tiers where people, if they can afford to move up from there, right? So everyone has a place to put their head down at night, but you also have a way that you can get to the next tier if you actually, if you want to, right? So the biggest jump in generational wealth in this country is owning real estate, right? The biggest dividing line historically in the United States has always been between renters and homeowners, and that's basically the dividing line between the working class and the middle class. And now we see the city not just promoting, but actively planning and pushing these massive high income rental properties. So all they're doing is moving that threshold for what was middle class, saying, well, if you can, we want to move you to the working class, even if you're making a good salary, because that money is just going to come right from their paycheck, go right into a rental property, and that money, all the profit from that rental property is going to be going to some investor in Boston or New York or wherever that owns that property is. They're not building it into their own equity, right? I'd much rather see more New Londoners own their own properties, right? I think condos are a much better, or townhouses that you can buy into, are a much better way of preserving that income. So I'd rather say, look at you, even at 7% or whatever mortgages right now, see that rate going, 7% going to a bank versus 100% going to the investment firm that built these properties to try to take money from the people in New London.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I think as we look at this, if we look at it as different than a ladder, right? Because
I'll say move over. You're sliding out.
Oh.
You're sliding out
oh,
the
am I
camera there.
sliding out? Okay. Instead of looking at it as a ladder, if we look at it as just one big circle, one big pot, and people will move in and out of those structures. One of the things that struck me about the meeting today with the housing authority is when we look at public housing, we don't have to. One of the things I would love to see them do is create different formats for housing at the complex. So in addition to having, maybe low-rise housing as opposed to high-rise apartments, having single family units, having townhomes, so that you're meeting the different needs of different people depending on where they are. I've spoken with several residents who said they don't want to live in a high-rise unit, right? They like having some outdoor space. They like having their own private entryway. We also need to think about generational housing. And this was my challenge to the folks from the Housing Commission, is a lot of people who live in New London live in multi-generational housing, right? And it's a part of our culture. And I think when we have the folks who are making the decisions, they look at it from a very Euro-central family unit, husband, wife, children, where a lot of cultures have aunts and uncles and grandparents. And why can't we create generational housing within public housing units? That's going to serve a lot of different needs more than just housing. We have elderly people that are dealing with, different emotional issues of loneliness, right? Or just being separated from their family. And a lot of it has to do because of the housing. We have people that might have medical issues, and if they have family members if they live with them, can better serve them in those needs and just be a part of that person's life. I would love for New London to kind of set the benchmark for that in our area. And I looked online really quickly before coming today, and HUD does offer generational housing around the country, and I would love for us to explore that option. What do you think about that?
I think I agree. I mean, my grandfather lived with us. There was 3 generations in the house when I was growing up. I think there's some barriers to that we as city councilors won't be able to tackle because at the state level and the HUD funding, a lot of that's based on income levels. The more people you put in there, the more combined income, especially if they're in Section 8 housing. So every time you add another person to that level, it also creates a market need from the state itself to try to make these high-rise units when you do it that way. I think having housing where you break it up by multi-income, right? Where if we have, I think New York City has it by law, 20% of every building has to have some form of low-income housing, whether it's Section 8 or subsidized or some kind of housing voucher program. They have to have some percentage, so you're mixing the population of the people that are special needs, the people that are elderly, the people that are low income with the rest of the working class and the middle class population in these buildings. Is probably a much smoother way to doing it. I think trying to force the HUD funding where you're kind of stuck with only low income, the way the HUD and the state funding set up is it forced these pockets of poverty. And you
Absolutely.
see it fail over and over again. And I think it's one of these things that's well-meaning and poorly executed.
It's not even well-meaning. It hasn't worked.
Yeah, it's really well-meaning and poorly
it's not
executed.
even well-meaning. And we have to change the way that we're thinking. We have to change the way that we do things. I think people are comfortable with doing what they've always done, even when it's not working. It's not working. And so part of what we need to do as a city council is really being real what we know hasn't worked and really be intentional about creating change. One of the other things, and I want to get your thoughts on this, that came out of the housing meeting today was it focused on the budget. It was an audit review. And New London Public Housing had a little bit over $1 million of surplus that the auditor had shared. And while on the surface that may seem like, okay, they're being fiscally responsible, but as I was leaving the meeting, the thought that occurred to me was, what could we have? There's no reason for a public housing development to have $1 million in surplus money when I'm sure there were needs, things that have gone unmet. And hearing from some of the residents that live there, I bet there were things that we could have done, they could have done to make housing much better for the residents that live there. So having $1 million surplus is something that I would definitely want to learn more about if I'm elected to city council, and see if there's ways that we could better utilize our budget in ways that's going to benefit our residents.
Yeah, I think part of it is surplus is more a reserve. Again, it goes back to we're tied by the state and the HUD funding, so the requirement was 6 months. And I think he said the 1.8 million was 10 months, so they gave themselves a 4-month barge.
So it
a 4-month barge,
exceeded,
yeah.
right?
So it exceeded, yes, I agree.
Right.
So you have a couple $100,000 there extra that they could be spending on projects or programs to
I think so.
improve the place.
And some of that could be, enhancement. I think we have this idea when we look at public housing as baseline, support, the minimum that we need to provide. And I think we have to change that mindset, especially when we're operating with such a large surplus. The other thing that I want us to think about in terms of the new housing project, because as I mentioned, we're in this redevelopment phase, right? What can we do differently? Is we have such an amazing program here with our fresh community, with fresh foods and doing urban farming. How amazing would it be is if we partnered with Fresh and allow them to have some space to be able to create urban gardens so that we can have, large scale rather than a couple of bins, which we have now, but really have a working farm that provides fresh produce, fresh food that residents can avail themselves of. Maybe even, I know some parts of the city allows for chickens and having, some.
As long as you don't have a rooster.
Again, it's just thinking outside of the box, and what that can provide. And the last thing I'll add in terms of the public housing is, and this could also go into, as we bring in developers, is having a mandate and a requirement that they create some outdoor space, right, that's public facing, that the community can avail themselves of. Because what we see now in New London housing is we have the housing as the front wall, right, to the street. And then if there is any space, open space, it's always behind. And and even in our developments, if we look at our housing like the Beam or the Docks, any space they have is either rooftop, right? So that sends the message of that's not for you, stay away. It's only for the residents, or it's behind the building.
Fence, yeah.
So it's not forward facing to the community. So I would just love to see us reimagine how we're doing development in New London.
I still worry about saying we want to build more, housing that the city owns. One, I don't think the city should be in the business of being a landlord. We should be working to promote development as best we can to make sure we have enough units, that there's enough individual units for the population we have and to continue to grow as a city. Because I think there's a lot of evidence that shows when you do have a section of, this block, this half acre, this 6 acres, with this many units on it, the prices around it go up, right? And now, unless you're one of the 200-300 families that live in these units, now the prices for everyone else goes up with it. So I think part of one of the solutions you can tackle with that would be like a land value tax. And I know I've talked with Ron on this before, and I've watched some catalog of your show here to get educated on it. But taxing the land value as opposed to the improvement. So when you have a lot and you're developing it, you're trying to make the best use of it. I think people are threatened by it because they say, especially people that have single-family homes, feel threatened that it's going to diminish from their equity, right? Like I said, most people, their life savings is their home. So if you concentrate that or limit it to places that are high-density urban development, so our downtown areas, right? You can get better development of a whole bunch of empty storefronts and empty lots, right? That corner of Brewer Street's been empty for the 15 years I've been here. And I get it's a brownfield, but you can develop on that. It just costs money. But if you give someone the thing and say, hey, you can use this for more than just a $30 a car parking on SaleFest, you can be a much better use for that thing if the person that owns it knows they're not going to have to pay more taxes by making that property better and making more units for more people to live in.
Absolutely. I mean, land is, already defined. We're not going to acquire more of it.
Right.
And so how we best utilize that as a tax base for the city is really important. So, I'm open to definitely exploring all options and being creative, which kind of brings us to one of the things that I think we need to talk about is most of New London, especially the downtown area, is zoned as an enterprise zone, innovation zone. It's like 3 zones that they have.
They have some overlay zones as well.
Yeah, and what that does is it just sends a message to developers that New London is prime for them to do their projects and to take advantage of what our small city has to offer. And we don't require very much of them in that process because we're so open. And there's a thing of being too open to development without having any parameters. And I think the city, will be really important for us to start setting some parameters and expectations. And maybe, what you're talking about with the land tax system, that might be something to explore.
Well, one thing, when the Community Land Trust was first getting started, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was part of a group that was doing research. And even then, people's mortgages were more affordable than people's rent. And imagine now, it's, rents have skyrocketed. So it's probably even more the case now, particularly if people already owned. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that second tier, that people can move into houses that they own. And when you talk about multi-generational houses, there's a lot of resistance. I live in an R1 zone, but my block is old. So it predates zoning. So this R1 zone has a lot of 2-family houses in it, and I think maybe even 1 4-family. But many of those houses have had multi-generations living in them, and that's actually made the neighborhood more stable. Mm-hmm. And yet, if you try to talk to people who live in newer residential R1 neighborhoods and say, let's make it easier for people to have 2-family buildings, they go ballistic. And the reality was that City Council did opt out of, and Planning and Zoning as well, opted out of Desegregate Connecticut's recommendation to ease up parameters for creating accessory dwelling units in R1 neighborhoods. It's not impossible to do, but it's still bureaucratically more cumbersome. Like the owners have to submit have a deed restriction that an owner will always live there, and also submit an affidavit every year to the enforcement officer,
that's excessive,
confirming that they are living there. And I think, well, we have all these apartment buildings all over town. Do any owners live in them? It's like, why? It seemed like kind of a double standard to me that, you know, a big developer can have zero presence. Their accountants, their, you know, their goods, you know, their money doesn't even circulate in the city at all.
Exactly.
And we're actually making it harder for local people who want to be small-scale landlords.
Especially when we have such limited housing in the city. You would think that that would be something that the city council would explore, right? As a way to not only make home ownership affordable, because right now you cannot buy a home for under $200,000 in New London.
I would close it.
And you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you could easily do that and have your picking. Today, you cannot. So people are going to need to have additional rent. There's a rental market that is here. Why are we not allowing that for our homeowners that are here, but are allowing it for developers? And that, again, I think that goes back to the mindset of our city leadership, seeing developers as the only possible option of developing and making our city better. And they're not looking outside of that, and they'll take that at any cost. And the cost is to all of us that live here.
And both of you have handed out literature, you know, because you're campaigning. And there are some neighborhoods where there are still quite a few empty houses. A lot of them are in areas that are close to EB and the hospital, the big employers between, you know, Montauk and Ocean Avenue, some of the side streets. And the city at one time had a program to help, you know, down payment for city employees, and also more funds for lead abatement, asbestos abatement, bringing houses in poor condition up to code. And I'm not hearing so much about that. What are your thoughts?
I think in general you have a lot of investors, even like you're saying, small scale people. So I would reckon to guess, and again it's just a guess, that most two-family units in our city are not owner occupied. Right, the number
you're
of
right.
well, my friend has one. He lives upstairs. He has 2 properties downstairs, so that's the exception to the rule. But for the most part, I think there's fewer people that own it and they're using it as rental properties. I think with the rise of Airbnb and Vrbo, you have a lot more investment firms buying these houses up to rent them out. One of the things I want to do, and I put on my literature, right, on my card I hand out to everyone, try to flip the way we do tax abatements in the city. Right? Instead of tax abating $25 million for 20 years to some developer to come and develop, you know, a parcel of land, we give a tax abatement to any owner-occupied homeowner. So if you buy a house in New London and you put money into your house, instead of that money going, and so instead of a down payment assistance where you're giving it to a mortgage company or, you know, or the lawyers that are helping you do the down payment, or instead of the abatement going to some developer that's out of the state or out of the city, if you put that money into your property, right? So if you buy a house for, let's say, $300,000 and you put $20,000 into that property, you get a $20,000 abatement. Don't make it a thing that you have to go apply every year. Make it a standing law on the books in the city, and make a standing abatement that if you buy a property and you live there and you can validate that you live there for a certain period of time, you don't pay taxes on it if you put that much work into it. So you'll start fixing up that housing stock. You know, you'll get people to buy houses and put the money into it, and then that money you spent goes into your property, which you then own and can sell later if you move out of the city, or it could appreciate in value.
Goes into your property or goes back into the community where you live.
Exactly. It stays in your community, right?
Exactly right. As opposed to, you know, an absentee landlord that's taking the profits and going back to his or her community where they live. In terms of what's being done with some of the city's money and funds that they're responsible for, you know, we just had ARPA funding being utilized to buy holiday decorations for downtown. $15,000, right? So And the mayor seemed to be quite pleased with that because he said now we can bring in more tourists and compete with places like Mystic. And to me, that's almost like putting lipstick on a pig. There's so much that we need to do to our downtown. Dressing it up in garland and lights should not be the first priority. Really utilizing funds that's going to make a real difference in the infrastructure long term in our city is way more important than that. I also want to know what the city is doing with some of the community block grants and where we talk about funding for homeowners to fix up their structure or new windows and sidewalks and those types of things. That's what the community block grants were intended for, and we haven't been seeing very much of that.
That's very true. I applied for CDBG funding for Riverside Park, and this last year we asked for money to repair the retaining wall along the entrance near Stanner Street because water's pouring through in places. It's in bad shape. The integrity of it, if it fails, what happens to the integrity of Stanner Street? We got very little funding, but when I put in the application, Tom Bombria, who manages that money, told me just that the original intent of this community development block grants was to repair old cities' aging infrastructure. And that is really, he was so glad to see an application that did address repairing a retaining wall that was put up in the 1920s. But that is not where the bulk of the money goes to.
And I wager the reason that it's so is because people don't know. The city has a problem with marketing, with its ability to market what's available to the community. So unless you're in the know, you don't know that this is available for that. We just talked about recently in the news, we just had, Muddy Waters had a major fire at their property, and we just, I read in the newspaper that they received ARPA funding to help with some of the repairs to the facade of the building, and without a whole lot of detail from the newspaper, it almost even implied to some of the interior repairs as well. And was there did other businesses know about that opportunity for funding available? Like, how were those decisions made? How was the community informed of funds being available for these types of things? So, I just think we just need to do a better job as a city of city leadership of getting this information out.
Well, like I said at the beginning, I think we live in a city where our city council picks winners and losers. It's a lot of it's based on who you know and how well connected you are. I think we have to change that paradigm. The community block grant should be going to things like Riverside Park, right? To the parks and to the common spaces. It shouldn't be going to fix up a private. If someone buys a property and wants to fix it up, great. More power to you. Come up with a business plan that would make that recoup that money you spend. Don't just say to the city, oh, well, I remember I donated to your campaign. Can you give me $100,000 in grant money for fixing my building now? Right? We have to stop that. That's what's gotten it. That's holding us back. That's the number one thing in the city is holding us back.
And I mean, and we're speaking, from a position of really not knowing, because these are the decisions that are being made behind closed doors, or in meetings where, the public does not know to attend. We're not invited to say this is on the agenda and we want to get your feedback. There's a difference between, having a public meeting and then inviting people for feedback and engagement. That's one of the points that if I'm elected to city council, one of the things that I would love to see implemented is a city scorecard that addresses how we're making decisions about things, right? And looking at the points, what's important to us, public engagement, historical preservation, economic development. There's about 10 different points on that. And I think it's just a really good way for us to stay on track. where if we say this is important to us as a city, where actually our policies and proposals are addressing that, speaking to that.
Well, yeah, I'm a big fan of the economist Art Rolnick, who, for one, says he's really kind of anti-subsidies for big developers because his feeling is it moves jobs around and projects around, but it doesn't actually create growth. And his answer turned out to be what you spend money on, and his thing was education, early childhood education, which is how I got to know about him. But the other point he would make is instead of looking at your budget just in terms of dollars, figure out in each area what is the return on the investment you're putting in. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't see a lot of that in New London.
Well, I think in our city we have a history of someone thinks they want to make an investment, the city will take it, destroy everything, someone else will back out of it. You're seeing it with the wind farm right now, right? Eversource is backed out, Avantgarde or whatever the other company was, Orsted has a strike on their hands, right? And they're going to the White House and saying we need more federal funding. They're looking for these handouts, but we go and do something. The city gets behind it, says, oh, look, we have the next golden goose. And then that goose leaves or gets killed. And then they go, okay, but now we have this blighted property, or we have a blank, empty lot somewhere that they sit on. We sat on Fort Trumbull for, a generation here in New London?
Well, where Parcel J, where the docks is, I remember when that, I'm not a born and bred person, in this area person, but I remember when the Shaw's Cove area was demolished. It was around 1980. So that sat for 40 years. Fort Trumbull has sat for 20 years at this point. And then it seems like there's a sense of desperation to do something. So anyway, I'm glad you all brought this kind of thing up because the City and Town Development Act, which is what allows us, City Council, to grant these abatements, is coming up for renewal in 2024. It's a council vote to renew it. When it was first adopted, it was a referendum, but now it's a council vote. So I think it's an ideal time to talk about, well, if we can give these incentives, how do we want to do it that will really benefit the city and not just, give a handout to anyone who has a flashy plan?
Yeah. So recently, the other day, I wanted to see who owned, what was the developer that did the beam on Howard Street. And so they were a development group called Jefferson Apartment Group. And so I started to go down the rabbit hole and digging a little bit further online. And what I found is when I looked at Jefferson Apartment Groups, all of their other projects around the country, they seem to have a vastly different approach to me, depending on the city. So I looked at some of their projects in Washington, D.C. And I don't know whether or not they received a tax abatement or not there. But what I do know is that that community had 5 requirements that, the developer had to meet. They had to create some outdoor space that was forward-facing for the community. They had to have impact on economic development. They had to contribute to a scholarship fund that was there. They had to provide or be a part of training and development for entrepreneurship, small business development in that community. And then there was a 5th area that they needed to meet. I can't remember what that is. But the bottom line is they checked those boxes. So in terms of what you're talking about in 2024, when the conversation comes up about the vote, my thing is, more so than whether or not we give a tax abatement, is what are we receiving from the city? How are our residents? How are we benefiting above and beyond just having the actual development? But how is our residents? What's the community receiving for having developers come in? And I think we need to develop our own criteria and requirements when we have development in our city. And I don't think it's too late for Fort Trumbull. I think the time is now to really reevaluate what has been discussed and the things, the changes that we could possibly make. And even on Garfield Avenue, those housing developments that are going up, we have 2 projects that are up and coming in New London. And so we need to start really having a plan in place on and a connection between all of these different developments, right? What I saw in DC in this neighborhood, it was Noma, north of Massachusetts Avenue in DC. And they have a plan, no matter where you live in the city or what development, housing development is going on, you're contributing to the whole strategic plan of that area. When everything was connected, neighborhoods, parks, art, everything was connected.
So I agree with you on having it being requirements driven, right? So I think that we have to start creating good requirements for how we do it. So instead of saying you win, you win, you win, we say here's the requirements we're setting out for the organization. I have concern with some of the examples you gave, like how do you verify economic development for the area, or how long does an educational program have to last, or how many people does it have to educate? Do they say they have 1 class a year for 1 person for 10 years and that counts? So in engineering, we have a principle called V&V, verification and validation. And basically, verification is did you build the system or the thing right? And validation is did you build the right thing? And our city doesn't really do either of those. Maybe we do verification that we said, you built it to the code, right? It's a building code, you built it to our building code. The fire marshal comes in and checks it, right? But we very seldomly do any validation. And our city government on the council side doesn't do any whatsoever, right? They don't say, are we doing the right thing? They're just saying, we found a solution, go run with this. So
right, and I think they probably had an engineer on their team in DC because they were very specific on what that would look like. So for example, the one that, the particular housing project that Jefferson Apartment Group was involved in, they, on site of the apartment building, they had it looked like a training facility to teach entrepreneurs how to open up a restaurant business. So for me, that was like a light bulb. It's like we want to bring people to live downtown. We want to have restaurants and places for people to go. Wouldn't it be great to have a training facility? And the developer that's coming into our city with millions and millions of dollars to foot the bill for that, at least initially? That would be great. The other piece that they had was an education, was they had a daycare center that was on site. Again, it wasn't, the residents could utilize it, but it looked to me like it was also for the community.
Okay, the sad thing is we have 5 minutes left. This is a real quick question that we don't have very much time, but someone had asked online, does the city need another charter review commission? And what are your thoughts on looking at the charter, opening it up?
yes.
And yes.
Okay.
We have a lot of things in the charter that our city council currently does not follow, or they waive it every time. So I want to see them put their money where their mouth is and see the sitting councilors, if they get reelected, the ones that do, see if they would vote for the things that they're constantly ignoring. If they'd be willing to actually put that down on paper. I also think there's a minority representation. We're one of the only 2 municipalities in the state that don't have it. Right? It's a state law, but somehow we've gotten around.
We've gotten grandfathered in. We don't have elected registrars of voters either.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a.
Yeah, we have.
And it's just good business. I mean, every business or entity should self-evaluate. And so we haven't looked at the charter since 2008, 2009. It's time to review it, you know, and make decisions. Nothing is static. We're always changing, and so it just makes sense. So yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask if for like half a minute, the staff can put the ballot online so people can take a look, because both Seanice and Aaron are on the ballot, not on line A. In fact, they're under each other. Aaron is on
But we're
2B.
not running against each other.
Right, and
So
Seanice is on 2 D. And I did want to make the point that the words say choose any 7.
And up to 7.
Up to 7, right, up to 7. Vote for up to 7. Oh, here's the ballot. And I had a friend of mine, who was also Green Party, say, start from the bottom of the ballot and vote for the individuals you want. Then when you get to line A, you'll still probably, in this town, have some more spaces. You can choose the best of the line A people, because there are a couple who are showing up at things, even though it's not most of them. But that is the ballot, and do not think you have to choose between Aaron and Seanice, or even between Aaron and Seanice and Jocelyn, because they're in the same column, but it's not a head-to-head election. Up to 7.
The columns don't matter. Yep. And in bullet vote, you don't have to do all 7. You can do what the people you want to win, because every vote you don't give to someone else is one less vote. So one more vote for your person, someone that would be getting more votes is getting.
Right. Some people like to vote for all 7. Some people like to vote for the few they like best, and some like to vote for whatever would make their own best dream team. And I usually also ask people to think about having people who bring a variety of different skill sets to the boards, because elected boards are pretty randomly selected, unlike boards of any kind of intentional committee, nonprofit organization, where whoever's putting together the board is looking for a group that people complement each other. This is not true with elected officials, elected boards, so our voters maybe have to take that into account. And in the last 2 minutes, I wanted to mention a couple of events that are coming up. Tomorrow night at our headquarters at 7 p.m., the State Green Party is just having a social event. So anyone who wants to come and hang out, we always have food. We always have people to talk to. Friday is Halloween Town. I'll be there. Some Greens will be there. I assume some Republicans will be there.
I think we're using my truck actually. So yeah.
Oh yeah, we're using our truck too.
I got wrapped into doing that one, right?
Yeah. And Saturday at our headquarters again on Masonic Street, we're showing the film Speaking in Tongues at 3 p.m. It's a 1-hour-long documentary about multilingual immersion schools, public schools in San Francisco, where kids learn math in like Mandarin. It's really interesting. And Saturday, that was Saturday. Sunday, a Rico Chow. This is not political. The Riverside Park art exhibit, people who came to paint in September at the park. We're going to have their art at Rico Chow. Once again, we'll have food. You can look at paintings. It's social, and that's 4 to 7. And I think that's all the time we have. They're telling us we need to end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Seanice.
Great
We'll
discussion.
be seeing both of them, I'm sure, over the next couple weeks. And look beyond line A, because there are some interesting candidates out there. And next year it'll be our 3 Green Team people. So save up your questions. Have a good night, and we'll see you next week. And thanks, Aaron and Seanice.